In the financial world, when a company's leadership team starts leaking confidential information to the press, it signals something far more troubling than disagreement. It signals institutional collapse. That's where we are with what's emerging from inside the Trump administration. You see, I've been watching markets and institutions for 74 years now, and I can tell you that what we're witnessing isn't just political drama. It's a textbook case of organizational disintegration that follows patterns I've seen in failing corporations time and time again. Let me start with what brought this to my attention. On November 12th, according to sources inside Mar-a-Lago who spoke with major news outlets, Melania Trump made a series of private remarks to close advisors that have now found their way into the press. You see, this isn't speculation. Multiple independent sources confirmed to the Washington Post and CNN that the former First Lady expressed deep concerns about the direction of her husband's inner circle. She specifically mentioned, according to these accounts, that too many people are playing games with Donald's trust and that the chaos isn't sustainable anymore. Now, you see, in business terms, this is like the CEO's spouse calling board members to warn them the company is heading off a cliff. It doesn't happen unless something fundamental has broken down. I've seen this pattern before in 2008 when Bear Stearns' executives' family members started making worried calls. 6 weeks later, the firm collapsed. The parallel here isn't about finance. It's about institutional integrity under stress. The specifics matter enormously. You see, according to a November 14th memo that was leaked to Politico, there are currently 3 distinct factions operating within what should be a unified leadership structure. The first faction, led by what sources describe as the Florida crowd, consists of advisors who've been with Trump since his Mar-a-Lago relocation. The second faction represents what insiders call the 2024 campaign professionals, people brought in specifically for electoral purposes. The third faction, and perhaps most significant, consists of family members who feel increasingly sidelined. You see, when I analyze a company's health, I look for coherence in decision-making. I look for whether the management team is pulling in the same direction. What we're seeing here is the opposite. On November 16th, according to 3 separate sources who spoke to the New York Times, there was a heated confrontation at Mar-a-Lago between senior advisors over media strategy. One faction wanted aggressive confrontation with critics. Another faction argued for strategic silence. The meeting reportedly ended with no resolution and multiple participants leaving early. Here's what concerns me from an institutional perspective. You see, Melania Trump's leaked remarks weren't just about personality conflicts. According to the full context provided by sources to the Washington Post, she specifically raised concerns about financial irregularities in campaign spending. She mentioned, according to these accounts, that she'd seen invoices that didn't add up and that money was being directed in ways that don't make sense. Now, in corporate terms, when the CEO's spouse starts questioning the books, you have a serious governance crisis. I've been investing since 1951, and I've learned that institutions fail in predictable ways. They fail when internal discipline breaks down. They fail when factions form around competing interests rather than shared goals. They fail when people start protecting their positions instead of the institution itself. You see, every single one of these warning signs is flashing red in what we're seeing from inside Trump's operation. Let me give you some specifics that demonstrate the scope of this breakdown. On November 18th, according to detailed reporting in The Atlantic, at least 4 senior advisors have established what they call parallel communication structures. You see, this means they're not going through official channels. They're not following established protocols. Instead, they're creating their own networks to route information, make decisions, and coordinate actions. In business, we call this shadow management, and it's always a precursor to institutional failure. The timeline is instructive. You see, according to sources who spoke with multiple outlets, the splintering began in earnest on October 23rd. immediately following a private meeting at Mar-a-Lago where Trump reportedly expressed frustration with what he perceived as insufficient loyalty from his team. 3 days later, on October 26th, the first leaks began appearing in major media outlets. These weren't minor procedural details. These were substantive policy disagreements and personal conflicts that should never have left private meetings. By October 30th, according to a source familiar with internal communications who spoke with CNN, at least 2 senior advisors had begun quietly shopping for positions outside Trump's immediate orbit. You see, when executives start looking for exits, they're not just seeking new opportunities. They're reading institutional warning signs and protecting themselves from what they see coming. November 3rd marked a significant escalation. According to reporting in the Washington Post, that's when Melania Trump first expressed her concerns to what she believed were trusted confidants. She specifically mentioned, according to these accounts, 3 individuals by name who she felt were using Donald rather than serving him. Within 72 hours, details of that conversation had leaked to the press. You see, the speed of that leak tells you something critical. It tells you that the traditional barriers that protect sensitive information have completely broken down. Here's what I find most troubling from an institutional standpoint. You see, on November 8th, according to sources who spoke with Politico, there was a scheduled meeting of senior advisors to discuss year-end strategy and planning for 2024. The meeting was supposed to last 3 hours. It lasted 27 minutes. Multiple participants left without explanation. No decisions were made. No follow-up meeting was scheduled. In corporate terms, this is the equivalent of a board meeting collapsing because directors can't agree on basic facts or procedures. The financial implications can't be ignored. You see, according to Federal Election Commission filings reviewed by multiple news organizations, Trump's various political organizations spent $127 million between July and September of 2024. But according to sources familiar with internal budgets who spoke with the Washington Post, there's significant dispute about where approximately $34 million of that spending actually went. Different factions are providing different explanations. The documentation is incomplete. And most significantly, there's no unified effort to reconcile these discrepancies. Now, you see, I've seen this pattern in corporate fraud cases. I saw it at Enron. I saw it at WorldCom. I'm not saying fraud is occurring here, but I am saying that when financial records become disputed territory between factions, when accounting becomes a weapon in internal power struggles, you have the conditions that allow serious problems to develop and metastasize. Melania Trump's specific concerns about finances, according to the leaked accounts, focused on consulting fees. She reportedly questioned why certain consultants were being paid amounts that seemed disproportionate to their actual work product. You see, in business, this is called fee extraction, and it's often a sign that people are enriching themselves from an organization rather than building its value. She specifically mentioned, according to sources, one consultant who was paid $3.7 million over 6 months, despite producing, in her view, minimal tangible results. The response to Melania's concerns is perhaps more revealing than the concerns themselves. You see, according to multiple sources who spoke with the New York Times, when she raised these issues in what she thought were private conversations, the reaction wasn't investigation or transparency. The reaction was circling the wagons. Within days, according to these accounts, the individuals she'd questioned began a coordinated effort to isolate her from internal financial discussions. They cut off her access to certain advisors. They redirected information flows. They essentially treated the CEO's spouse as a threat to be managed rather than as a legitimate voice raising valid concerns. From my 74 years of experience in evaluating organizations, I can tell you that this response is diagnostic. You see, healthy institutions welcome scrutiny. They investigate concerns. They seek truth even when it's uncomfortable. Failing, institutions punish whistleblowers, even when the whistleblower is someone who should be on the inside. The treatment of Melania Trump's concerns based on these leaked accounts follows the pattern of institutional failure rather than institutional health. Let me give you another specific data point that illuminates the broader pattern. On November 11th, according to detailed reporting in Axios, a scheduled conference call among senior advisors had to be abruptly canceled because two of the key participants refused to be on the call together. You see, this wasn't about scheduling conflicts. This was about personal animosity reaching levels where basic professional collaboration became impossible. The call was rescheduled 3 times over the following week, and according to sources, it ultimately never happened. Critical decisions that needed coordination remained unmade. The implications extend beyond internal dysfunction. You see, according to sources who spoke with The Wall Street Journal, at least 3 major Republican donors have privately expressed concern about the organizational chaos. One donor, who contributed $15 million to Trump-aligned political committees in 2023, told associates he's pausing further contributions until he sees evidence of professional management and financial discipline. Another donor requested, according to these accounts, a detailed audit of spending before committing additional funds. These requests were reportedly not well received by the Trump team. In investment terms, this is what we call a loss of confidence. You see, donors are investors. They're putting capital into an operation expecting certain returns, whether those returns are political outcomes or influence or ideological advancement. When investors start questioning basic financial management and organizational competence, they withdraw their capital. That withdrawal accelerates institutional stress, which leads to more chaos, which causes more investors to flee. It's a self-reinforcing cycle that I've seen destroy companies with far more resources and stability than any political operation. Now, let me talk about what happened on November 15th, because this is where the constitutional dimension becomes impossible to ignore. According to sources who spoke with multiple news outlets, there was a discussion among advisors about how to handle potential legal challenges related to the 2024 election. You see, the discussion itself isn't remarkable. Any campaign should plan for legal contingencies. What's remarkable is that, according to these accounts, different factions in the room were operating from fundamentally different assumptions about what legal strategies were legitimate, what constitutional boundaries existed, and what the actual goal of such challenges would be. One faction, according to these leaked accounts, argued for aggressive challenges that would push constitutional boundaries. Another faction argued that such approaches would be legally and ethically problematic. You see, this isn't a tactical disagreement. This is a fundamental split about whether democratic norms and constitutional limits are constraints to be respected or obstacles to be overcome. That kind of philosophical divide within a leadership team is, in organizational terms, catastrophic. It means there's no shared foundation for decision-making. The meeting on November 15th reportedly ended, according to sources, with different groups leaving to have separate follow-up discussions with their own faction members. There was no unified plan. There was no agreement on basic principles. There was just fragmentation and mistrust. You see, in business, I've learned that companies can survive many things, but they cannot survive the loss of shared purpose. When people in the same organization are working toward fundamentally different ends, the organization ceases to function as an organization. Here's another specific detail that demonstrates the depth of the breakdown. On November 17th, according to reporting in The Guardian, Melania Trump's chief of staff tried to schedule a meeting between the former First Lady and 3 senior advisors to discuss her concerns. The meeting was supposed to be private and constructive. According to sources, all 3 advisors declined the meeting. One specifically said, according to these accounts, that he didn't want to be part of internal drama. You see, refusing to meet with the CEO's spouse when she's raising legitimate organizational concerns isn't avoiding drama. It's creating the conditions for institutional collapse. I've been through market crises in 1973, 1987, 2000 and 2008. You see, every single one of those crises was preceded by institutional breakdowns where warning signs were ignored, where people in positions of authority refused to address problems, where loyalty to faction superseded loyalty to truth. What's emerging from the leaked accounts of Trump's inner circle follows that same pattern with disturbing precision. Let me talk about the specific mechanisms of institutional breakdown, because this is where my experience analyzing companies becomes directly relevant. You see, organizations fail through a predictable sequence. First, you get mission drift, where different factions start pursuing different goals. We're seeing that now with the competing visions for Trump's political operation. Second, you get information silos, where different groups stop sharing information and start hoarding it for advantage. We're seeing that with the parallel communication structures. Third, you get resource conflicts, where people start fighting over money, access, and influence rather than deploying resources strategically. We're seeing that with the financial disputes Melania raised. Fourth, and this is critical, you see, you get leadership paralysis, where the person at the top becomes unable to make decisions because every decision benefits one faction and threatens another. According to sources who spoke with the New York Times, Trump himself has become increasingly reluctant to make definitive calls on key personnel or strategy questions because he knows any decision will trigger blowback from one or more factions within his circle. This paralysis means problems don't get solved, they accumulate. Fifth, and finally, you get exodus, where the most capable people start leaving because they see where things are heading. According to multiple reports, at least 4 people who were considered highly effective operators have quietly distanced themselves from Trump's immediate circle over the past 6 weeks. You see, when the talented people leave first, it accelerates the decline because you're left with people who either can't see the problems or who benefit from the chaos. Now let me address the specific content of Melania Trump's leaked remarks in more detail, because they provide a window into just how serious this breakdown has become. According to the most complete account published by the Washington Post on November 19th, she made 7 specific points in her private conversations. First, she expressed concern that her husband was surrounded by people who put their own interests ahead of his. Second, she questioned the loyalty of at least 3 specific individuals, naming them by name. Third, she raised concerns about financial management and what she characterized as wasteful spending. Fourth, she worried that the chaos was damaging her husband's reputation and political viability. Fifth, she expressed frustration that her own concerns were being dismissed or ignored. Sixth, she worried about the legal exposure that might result from poor advice and reckless decision-making. And seventh, she questioned whether the current team was capable of running an effective national campaign. You see, every single one of those concerns reflects sophisticated institutional awareness. This isn't someone complaining about hurt feelings. This is someone who understands organizational dynamics, raising red flags about governance, financial management, strategic competence, and legal risk. The fact that these concerns were leaked rather than addressed tells you that the institution is more interested in protecting itself from scrutiny than in reforming itself. Let me give you a historical parallel that I think is instructive. In 2001, I was looking at Enron's financials, and something didn't add up. The revenue numbers were impressive, but when you dug into the details, when you looked at the actual cash flows and the complexity of the structured transactions, you could see that the numbers didn't reflect economic reality. A lot of very smart people were invested in Enron. A lot of analysts rated it highly. But the institutional rot was there if you knew how to look for it. I see similar patterns here, not in terms of fraud necessarily, but in terms of institutional breakdown. You see, there's a gap between the public presentation of unity and strength and the internal reality of faction and dysfunction. That gap always closes eventually. The question is just how much damage occurs in the closing. On November 20th, according to reporting in CNN, there was an attempt to impose order on the chaos. A meeting was called to establish, according to sources, clear lines of authority and communication protocols. The meeting lasted 4 hours. According to multiple accounts, it made things worse rather than better. Different factions used the meeting to air grievances rather than to find solutions. Accusations were made. Trust was further eroded. By the end, according to these accounts, the organizational structure was more confused rather than more clear. You see, I've learned that you can't fix institutional problems with meetings. You fix them with changes in incentives, accountability, and ultimately personnel. If the people in the room don't share basic values and basic goals, no amount of process and procedure will create functional collaboration. From what the leaked accounts describe, the people in Trump's inner circle fundamentally don't trust each other, don't share common assumptions about proper conduct, and are increasingly willing to damage the organization to protect their individual positions. The financial details deserve more examination. According to Federal Election Commission filings, Trump's political organizations raised $297 million in 2023. According to leaked internal documents discussed in the Wall Street Journal's November 18th reporting, approximately $189 million of that money was spent on operating expenses, consulting fees, and legal costs. That leaves $108 million, which sounds substantial. But according to sources familiar with internal planning, there's significant dispute about how much of that $108 million is actually available for campaign operations versus committed to other purposes or already encumbered by agreements made by different factions. You see, in corporate terms, this is a dispute about the balance sheet. When you can't agree on what resources you actually have available, you can't make rational, strategic decisions. Every choice becomes a battle, not just about whether it's the right choice, but about whether you can afford it and who gets to make that determination. This kind of fundamental financial ambiguity is corrosive to organizational function. Melania Trump's concern about consulting fees specifically points to what might be a larger problem. You see, according to the leaked accounts, she questioned why certain individuals were being paid through consulting arrangements rather than as regular advisors or staff. The difference matters legally and ethically. Staff have fiduciary duties. Consultants have contractual relationships. If people are structuring their compensation as consulting fees to avoid the accountability and transparency requirements of direct employment, that's a red flag. According to a detailed analysis published by the Daily Beast on November 16th, at least $43 million in payments from Trump's political organizations over the past 18 months went to entities that are structured to obscure the ultimate recipients of funds. These aren't necessarily illegal arrangements, but they're certainly designed to avoid transparency. You see, when organizations prioritize opacity over clarity in financial matters, it's usually because someone benefits from that opacity, and the people who benefit are rarely acting in the organization's best interest. Now, let me talk about the human element, because institutions are ultimately made of people, and people act from motives that aren't always rational or strategic. According to sources who spoke with the New York Times, at least 2 of the factions in Trump's inner circle are built around personal relationships and loyalties that predate his political career. These are people who've known each other for decades, who have complex histories of both collaboration and conflict. You see, that kind of personal history can be an organizational asset when times are good, but it becomes a massive liability when stress rises and old grievances resurface. The leaked accounts suggest that Melania Trump herself has been caught in these personal dynamics. According to sources who spoke with multiple outlets, there's at least one senior advisor whom she's never trusted, dating back to disagreements during Trump's first term. That person, according to these accounts, is now central to one of the major factions. You see, personal animosity at the leadership level gets transmitted down through an organization. It becomes impossible to have objective discussions about strategy or tactics when every interaction is filtered through personal history and interpersonal conflict. Here's a specific example that illustrates the problem. On November 9th, according to detailed reporting in Politico, there was a disagreement about media strategy related to a potential announcement. One faction argued for a primetime address. Another faction argued for a social media rollout. The disagreement wasn't really about media strategy. According to sources, it was about which faction would control the messaging and get credit for any positive response. You see, when decisions become primarily about internal power dynamics rather than external effectiveness, the organization has ceased to function as a rational actor. The decision, such as it was, got made when Trump apparently got frustrated with the back and forth and just did what he wanted without consulting either faction. According to these accounts, this led to both factions feeling undermined and excluded, which further damaged morale and trust. You see, that kind of organizational dynamic, where the leader makes impulsive decisions to escape from internal conflict, doesn't solve problems. It defers them and usually makes them worse. I want to talk specifically about the constitutional implications, because this isn't just about organizational dysfunction. You see, when sources describe discussions among Trump's advisors about legal challenges and constitutional questions, and when those descriptions reveal fundamental disagreements about whether constitutional limits are real constraints or negotiable obstacles, we're not talking about political strategy anymore. We're talking about threats to foundational institutional norms. According to the leaked accounts from the November 15th meeting, at least one faction argued, explicitly according to sources, that winning justifies whatever means are necessary. You see, that kind of thinking doesn't just threaten one organization or one campaign. It threatens the entire system of democratic accountability and constitutional government. I've spent my life in markets, and markets depend utterly on the rule of law, on predictable enforcement of clear rules, on the understanding that certain boundaries exist and will be respected. When political leaders start treating constitutional limits as optional, they're undermining the foundation that makes everything else, including markets and prosperity, possible. Here's what concerns me most about this dimension of the leaked information. You see, according to sources, when the more cautious faction raised concerns about legal and constitutional boundaries, the response from the more aggressive faction wasn't a substantive engagement with those concerns. The response, according to these accounts, was dismissal and accusation. People who raised constitutional questions were accused of insufficient loyalty, of being weak, of being captured by the establishment. That kind of response doesn't just shut down debate in the moment. It creates an organizational culture where raising legitimate concerns becomes professionally dangerous. I've seen this pattern in corporate frauds. You see, before Enron collapsed, before WorldCom imploded, there were people inside those companies who saw problems and raised concerns. Those people were marginalized, dismissed, and ultimately driven out. The people who stayed were either true believers who couldn't see the problems or cynical operators who could see the problems but benefited from them. That's not a sustainable mix for organizational health. Now, let me address something that I think is crucial for understanding why this matters beyond political horse race implications. You see, institutions exist to channel human behavior toward productive ends. Markets channel self-interest toward wealth creation. Democratic government channels political competition toward peaceful transfers of power and legitimate governance. These institutions work not because people are angels, but because the structures create incentives for constructive behavior and penalties for destructive behavior. When institutions break down, when the incentives get corrupted, when the penalties stop being enforced, you don't get better behavior, you get worse behavior. You see, the leaked accounts of Trump's inner circle describe an environment where loyalty is more valued than competence, where internal power trumps external effectiveness, where protecting one's position matters more than serving the organization's purpose. That's not just a description of one troubled campaign. It's a description of institutional corruption in its most fundamental sense. The trajectory matters enormously. You see, according to the chronology established by multiple news organizations reviewing leaked accounts and documents, the situation has deteriorated significantly just in the past 4 weeks. On October 23rd, there were tensions but still functional communication. By November 20th, you had open warfare between factions, parallel communication structures, and complete breakdown of collective decision-making. That rate of decay is alarming because it suggests momentum in the wrong direction with no evident mechanism to reverse it. Let me give you some more specific numbers that illustrate the resource implications. According to Federal Election Commission filings and leaked internal documents, Trump's political organizations currently employ approximately 340 people across various entities. According to sources who spoke with Bloomberg News on November 18th, at least 70 of those people are primarily loyal to specific factions rather than to the overall organization. You see, when 20% of your workforce is playing factional politics rather than doing their jobs, you've got a massive productivity and effectiveness problem. The cost implications are significant. According to these same sources, factional competition has led to duplicate work, with different groups independently pursuing similar projects without coordination. It's led to wasteful spending, with factions making commitments without checking whether other groups have already made similar commitments. And it's led to paralysis, where projects that need cross-factional coordination simply don't move forward. You see, this is the organizational equivalent of a company where different divisions are at war with each other. The company might survive for a while on momentum, but it's not building value. It's destroying it. Melania Trump's leaked concerns about financial irregularities take on additional significance in this context. You see, according to the accounts, she specifically mentioned instances where she saw invoices that appeared to be for the same services from different vendors. When she raised questions about potential duplication, she was told, according to sources, that the vendors were serving different factions and that coordination wasn't possible. That response reveals how deep the dysfunction runs. You're essentially admitting that you can't coordinate basic financial management because internal political considerations override operational efficiency. Now, I want to talk about what this means for the future, because institutional breakdowns have trajectories that are somewhat predictable if you understand the patterns. You see, what generally happens is that the dysfunction becomes increasingly difficult to hide. External partners, whether they're donors or vendors or political allies, start demanding explanations. Those demands create additional stress. The stress causes more fracturing. The fracturing makes coordination even more difficult. It's a death spiral that's very hard to reverse once it reaches a certain point. According to sources who spoke with The Atlantic, several major Republican figures have privately expressed concern that the organizational chaos around Trump is damaging not just his own political prospects, but the entire Republican coalition's effectiveness. You see, when dysfunction in one organization starts affecting allied organizations, you get pressure for one intervention. That pressure can sometimes force reform, but more often, especially when the organization is built around a single dominant personality, it just accelerates fragmentation as people decide to protect themselves rather than try to fix what's broken. Here's what I'd be watching for if I were evaluating this situation going forward. First, I'd watch for high-profile departures. You see, when truly talented people start leaving publicly, not just quietly distancing themselves, that's a signal that they've concluded the situation is irretrievable. Second, I'd watch for financial stress. If donors continue to withhold contributions, if legal costs continue to mount, if operating expenses aren't controlled, you'll see liquidity problems that force difficult choices. Third, I'd watch for external accountability. If prosecutors, regulators, or investigators start examining the financial irregularities that Melania Trump apparently raised concerns about, that creates an entirely new dimension of institutional stress. Fourth, and this is crucial, you see, I'd watch for whether Trump himself can or will impose order. So far, according to the leaked accounts, he's either unable or unwilling to definitively resolve the factional conflicts. If that continues, the fracturing will continue. If he tries to impose order by decisively backing one faction over another, he might restore short-term stability, but at the cost of losing whatever capabilities the losing faction provided. There's no clean solution once you've reached this level of institutional breakdown. Let me share a bit of historical perspective that I think is relevant. You see, I've watched presidents and presidential candidates for many decades now. I've seen plenty of internal disagreements and strategic debates. That's normal and healthy. What's not normal, what I haven't seen before at this scale, is a complete breakdown of basic institutional function around a major political figure. You usually see this level of chaos only in the final days of failed campaigns or troubled administrations. To see it during what should be a period of planning and organization building is highly unusual and deeply concerning. The leaked accounts of Melania Trump's remarks are significant, not because she's saying anything that sophisticated political observers didn't already suspect, but because they confirm that even people on the inside, people who should be most invested in maintaining the facade of unity and competence, have concluded that the situation is serious enough to risk going outside normal channels. You see, when insiders start leaking to the press, when they start trying to use external pressure to force internal reform, it's because internal mechanisms have failed. Now, I want to address something that I think is important for people to understand about institutional failure. You see, companies and organizations don't usually fail because of one bad decision or one bad person. They fail because of systems and cultures that allow and even reward destructive behavior. From what the leaked accounts describe, Trump's inner circle has developed a culture where loyalty to faction matters more than loyalty to purpose, where personal advantage trumps organizational effectiveness, where short-term maneuvering replaces long-term strategy. That kind of culture doesn't develop overnight, and it doesn't get fixed quickly. According to sources who spoke with multiple news organizations, there have been at least 3 previous attempts to impose order on Trump's political operation over the past 2 years. Each attempt failed. Each attempt left the situation worse than before because it created winners and losers, which hardened factional lines. You see, this pattern suggests that the dysfunction isn't just about people or circumstances. It's structural. It's built into how the organization operates and how power flows within it. The financial irregularities that Melania Trump reportedly raised are particularly concerning because money problems are often symptoms of deeper governance failures. You see, when you can't track spending, when you can't reconcile accounts, when different factions give different explanations for the same transactions, it's not usually because of accounting errors. It's because people are hiding something, or because coordination is broken down so completely that no one actually knows what's happening with the organization's resources. According to leaked internal documents discussed in reporting by the Daily Beast, there are currently disputes about approximately $34 million in expenditures from Trump's political organizations over the past 9 months. You see, $34 million isn't a rounding error. It's real money that should be accounted for. The fact that it's disputed, that different factions claim different things about where it went and why, suggests either incompetence, fraud, or complete breakdown of financial controls. None of those options is acceptable for an organization that's asking donors for hundreds of millions of dollars. Let me talk about the legal dimension, because this matters for understanding the full scope of potential problems. You see, according to sources who spoke with legal experts consulted by various news organizations, if the financial irregularities that Melania Trump reportedly raised actually involve improper use of campaign funds or fraudulent representations to donors, you're not just talking about organizational dysfunction, you're talking about potential federal crimes. Campaign finance law is complex, but certain things are clear. You can't use political donations for personal benefit. You can't lie to donors about how their money will be used. You can't create sham consulting arrangements to hide the real flow of funds. Now, I'm not saying that's what happened, but I am saying that when the CEO's spouse is raising concerns about financial irregularities, when those concerns are specific enough to mention particular invoices and particular amounts, when the response is to shut down inquiry rather than to investigate, you have the conditions where serious legal problems can develop. You see, cover-ups often create bigger problems than the original misconduct. It's the cover-up that demonstrates intent and consciousness of guilt. According to reporting in the New York Times, at least one attorney who previously worked with Trump's political organizations has expressed private concern to colleagues about potential legal exposure. The attorney specifically mentioned, according to sources, concerns about financial record keeping and disclosure obligations. You see, when lawyers start getting nervous, when they start creating paper trails to protect themselves, it's because they see legal risks that they don't want to be associated with. Here's what makes this situation particularly complex from an institutional standpoint. You see, normally when an organization faces serious problems, there's a board of directors or outside oversight that can step in, investigate, and impose accountability. Political campaigns don't really have that structure. They're essentially autocracies with the candidate at the top. If the candidate chooses to tolerate dysfunction, if he's unable or unwilling to impose discipline, there's no external mechanism to force reform short of legal intervention or complete collapse. According to the leaked accounts, Trump himself is aware of at least some of the factional conflicts and financial concerns. But according to these same accounts, he's been reluctant to take decisive action because every option has downside. If he backs one faction decisively, he loses capabilities from the other factions. If he tries to force compromise, he just gets more internal conflict. If he brings in outside people to impose order, they're immediately seen as threats by all the existing factions. You see, this is what management paralysis looks like. Every choice has gotten bad enough that making no choice seems preferable, even though making no choice guarantees continued deterioration. Let me share one more specific example that I think illustrates the human cost of this institutional breakdown. According to sources who spoke with The Guardian, there's a mid-level staff member who's been with Trump's political operation for 3 years. This person is, by all accounts, competent and dedicated. But according to these sources, the person has found themselves caught between factional conflicts with different senior advisors giving contradictory instructions and then blaming this staff member when things don't get done. The person has apparently told friends they're looking for a way out because the stress has become unbearable and the work environment has become toxic. You see, that's what institutional dysfunction does to people. It takes talented, motivated individuals and it grinds them down. It makes good work impossible and good people miserable. When organizations lose the ability to protect their people from destructive internal politics, they lose the ability to attract and retain talent. That accelerates the decline because you're left with people who either can't see how dysfunctional things have become or who lack better options. Now, I want to step back and talk about what this means in the broader context of American political institutions. You see, political campaigns are temporary organizations, and some level of chaos is normal. But campaigns also serve a crucial testing function. They test whether a candidate can build and manage a complex organization. They test whether the candidate can attract talented people and deploy resources effectively. They test whether the candidate can maintain discipline under stress. These aren't trivial questions. These are direct indicators of governing capability. From what the leaked accounts describe, Trump's current political operation is failing these tests badly. You see, he's not building organizational capacity. He's presiding over organizational disintegration. He's not attracting the most talented people or keeping the ones he has. He's caught in factional warfare that's driving capable people away. He's not maintaining financial discipline or strategic focus. He's allowing resources to be wasted and attention to be diverted to internal conflicts. These failures in a campaign context would be magnified enormously in a governing context. I want to be very clear about something. You see, I'm not making a partisan argument here. I'm making an institutional argument. Democratic institutions, including campaigns, need to function according to certain minimal standards of competence, integrity, and internal accountability. When those standards break down, when factionalism replaces function, when personal loyalty trumps institutional loyalty, You don't just have a bad campaign, you have a threat to democratic governance itself. According to sources who spoke with scholars of democratic institutions consulted by various news outlets, the patterns described in the leaked accounts of Trump's inner circle parallel patterns seen in democratic backsliding internationally. You see, when political organizations stop functioning as rational, rule-bound institutions and start functioning as personality cults torn by factional conflict, they become vehicles for authoritarian impulses, whether or not that's the original intent. The inability to impose internal discipline, the willingness to override normal accountability mechanisms, the treatment of loyal critics as enemies, these are warning signs that transcend normal political competition. Let me talk about one final dimension of this situation that I think is crucial. You see, institutions have what we might call moral authority, which is the sense that they deserve to be followed and respected. That authority comes from competence, integrity, and results. When institutions lose moral authority through dysfunction and scandal, they don't just become less effective, they become actively corrosive to the broader institutional ecosystem they're part of. From what the leaked accounts describe, Trump's political operation has lost moral authority even among many of the people still working within it. You see, when Melania Trump raises concerns and gets shut down, when talented people quietly distance themselves, when donors demand audits, when factions care more about internal positioning than external effectiveness, you're describing an organization that people no longer believe in even as they remain affiliated with it. That kind of cynical continuation is the opposite of institutional health. In my 74 years of experience with institutions, I've learned that the hardest thing to rebuild is trust. You see, once people conclude that an institution is fundamentally broken, once they decide that the problems are structural rather than fixable, they don't re-engage with optimism. They protect themselves. They look for exits. They minimize their exposure. That self-protective behavior is rational for individuals, but it's catastrophic for institutions because it becomes self-fulfilling. The institution fails because people expect it to fail and act accordingly. Here's my conclusion based on everything we know from the leaked accounts and public reporting. What we're seeing isn't typical campaign turbulence. It's institutional breakdown following classic patterns of organizational failure. The factionalism, the financial irregularities, the breakdown of internal communication and coordination, the loss of capable personnel, the inability of leadership to impose order. These are all symptoms of advanced institutional decay. You see, I've spent my life studying how organizations work and why they fail. I've developed the ability to recognize certain patterns. When I look at what's emerging from inside Trump's operation through these leaked accounts, I see patterns that concern me greatly, not just for the campaign itself, but for what it suggests about institutional capacity and commitment to democratic norms. The test going forward is whether these institutions can be rebuilt, whether the damage can be contained, whether accountability can be restored. That requires decisive action, transparency, willingness to make hard personnel decisions, and commitment to putting institutional health ahead of factional advantage. Based on the available evidence, I'm not confident we're going to see those things. But I hope I'm wrong, because the stakes extend far beyond any single campaign or election. They go to the heart of whether our democratic institutions can maintain the integrity and functionality that self-government requires. This isn't about politics in the usual sense. You see, it's about institutions, about accountability, about the difference between organizations that serve a purpose larger than themselves and organizations that exist to serve the ambitions of factions within them. That difference matters enormously. It matters for markets, which depend on institutional integrity. It matters for democracy, which depends on institutional accountability. And it matters for the future, because institutions, once broken, are very hard to rebuild. That's what makes the leaked accounts of turmoil in Trump's inner circle, and particularly Melania Trump's reported concerns, so significant. They're not just political gossip, they're warning signs of institutional failure that we ignore at our peril. From my 94 years on this earth, I can tell you that ignoring institutional warning signs never makes things better. It only allows problems to metastasize until the eventual reckoning becomes more painful and more destructive than it needed to be. We're watching that process unfold in real time, and we should pay very close attention to what it's teaching us about institutional health, democratic accountability, and the consequences of tolerating dysfunction in positions of public trust.